So I hope everybody's doing well today. I'm going to jump in from my tablet. Okay, so we are deep in the deductive system that enlists truth functional connectives, right? Specifically, we're focusing on the Boolean connectives or the Boolean operators. We have our pairs of rules for negation, conjunction, disjunction, as well as the contradiction symbol, the truth functional contradiction. So we've got our introlim, 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 and introlim for negation, conjunction, disjunction, and contradiction. What we get to move into today is the connectives that we use in propositional or sentential logic that add on to our existing list of operators. So one of the things that we're going to chat about in the next couple of chapters is going to be how the last two connectives that we study in this version of the system say the same thing, truth functionally speaking, as combinations of our Boolean operators. Okay. And the study that we're going to make, it parallels what we've already done. So we're going to say, okay, here are our connectives. Here's the symbolic logic notation that we're going to use for them. Here's how we, for each, here's how we translate. Here's how we build the truth table for each so we understand what the truth definitions are and so forth. Then what we do is we move into the intro and elim rules again for each of the last two connectives. So we'll end up with intro and elim rules for not just negation, conjunction, disjunction, and truth functional contradiction, but also the conditional and the biconditional. Okay. The conditional is a really interesting connective. There is some reason to believe that, for example, that the conditional is not in fact truth functional. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the importance of conditional claims in a number of disciplines, also in our daily lives, right? So I hope that it's the case you find the our study of the conditional and the biconditional to be pretty robust. But before we launch into that, does anybody have any outstanding questions, problems, confusions, comments about what we've done so far? What do we think? Is everybody liking who's used the proof checker, the proof machine rather? Does everybody find that useful? I know a couple of people are using it, but how is that going? Good, excellent. Thank you, Victoria. All right, so things are going okay. We still don't have our thumbs kind of emoji, but thumbs up on how things are going. Practice, are you getting enough of it? Okay, good. I need to post more practice. So I want there to be more practice than you have time to do, right? But I hope that you have given the additional practice that given the additional practice that I posted on Canvas, I hope that gets you through the material that we're covering now. Okay, so, sorry, bear with me. I'm going to get the whiteboard going. Okay, make sure that I can see everybody. I'll move the chat down just a little bit. Or actually, no, I better keep it over here. Okay. So, we are going to embark upon the study of the conditional and biconditional connectives. Okay, so let's start with the conditional. The conditional is ordinarily expressed as an if-then proposition, right? So we can say something like, if I have a question, I will type. Actually, let me adjust that. I'm going to keep everything in the present tense. I type a message in the chat window, or I speak up. Right? So I hope it's clear that this is a standard conditional claim. Notice the comma after the question, after the word question, tells us that what follows is a unit, right? Because notice that we've got one of our old friends here, right? So we've got our if-then claim, but notice the then is implied, right? So we've got the sentence, I have a question, that goes with the if clause. And then we have the disjunction, I type a message in the chat window or I speak up. That is that goes with the then clause, and it is itself a compound sentence. Okay. So the think about our ordinary ways of using the if-then expression. We think of conditions where what we assert after the word if is the condition, right? Or we say that what comes after the then is conditioned upon what comes after if, right? So unlike the other connectives that we've looked at so far, it feels like there's this dependent relationship, right, between the if and the then clauses. And that's something that we want to bear in mind as we go forward. We will see that our ordinary way of thinking about an if-then claim doesn't really bear out in a truth table. That notion of a dependent relationship doesn't really bear out. So just, file that away. That'll come up again. All right, so let's talk about what we're dealing with here. The sentence that occurs after if is the antecedent, and think about the language that we're using, right? Antecedent, that means ante is what is before, right? Antecedent, I can spell, right? And the sentence that occurs after then, whether the then is, explicitly asserted or just implied, is called the consequent. And the typical appearance of the antecedent and the consequent when we translate looks like this. So we translate conditional claims with an arrow, right? And we end up with the following, right? So antecedent, arrow, consequent. So I hope that you say, oh, okay, so the arrow in terms of its appearance, like where we put the symbolic notation, right, functions like the conjunction and the disjunction, right? So the arrow is always going to go between the if and the then clauses, right? So we have antecedent, consequent, we have if, arrow, then. That's going to get us started. We're going to see as we work on some translating that that there are some additional bits of language that we want to think about. Let's begin that process by going back to this notion of a dependent relationship that the conditional ordinarily expresses, right? So is it fair to say, for example, that in the assertion, if I have a question, I type a message in the chat window or I speak up, right? The having a question is the condition that, when satisfied, yields the chat window or speaking up part of the sentence. Does that make sense to say? What do we think? So far, so good, I hope. Give me a sign. Anything. Thank you, Victoria. Okay. All right. So, one of the ways that we can talk about the if-then relationship in terms of this notion of a condition is this. So I'll say it, I'll write it, and then let's talk a bit about it. Ella, no. No. Sorry, you get to hear the most obnoxious dog on the planet doing her best to interrupt us. Okay, so what I've written at the very bottom of our whiteboard is this. Sufficient condition is on the left side of the arrow. Necessary condition is on the right side of the arrow. So let's think about it this way. We say when we're thinking about, in our ordinary ways of thinking about, conditional claims, is to think in terms of the having a question in our example as a sufficient condition. So having a question is a sufficient condition for typing a message in the chat window or speaking up. Alternatively, we can say that if I have a question, I must, right? Then it must be the case, right? On the assumption that the antecedent really is a sufficient condition, it guarantees chatting in the chat window or speaking up, right? We're saying that I must speak up or use the chat window. So the language of sufficiency and necessity is also in play in a conditional claim. Another way that we can think about the conditional claim is in terms of a hypothetical, right? So let's think about, so let me go here, get a new whiteboard, right? So a conditional claim expresses a hypothetical, right? If something is the case, blah, 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 right? So in this sense, it is not an assertion in the same way, the Boolean connectives contribute to the creation of a compound sentence. Right? And the reason why I'm pushing on this now is I want us to get on the table just a clarification of our ordinary ways of thinking about the conditional. Right? That way, when we do get to what are typically some confusions about the truth functionality of the conditional claim, you are clear about what those perplexities involve, or at least you have a clearer idea than you would otherwise. Okay. So the hypothetical nature of the conditional is also what contributes to this intellectual feeling of dependence. Okay. So let's now talk a little bit about translating, and then we'll talk a bit about the biconditional, and then we'll get into the truth table. But am I right to think that so far I'm not saying anything that you don't already know? Again, one of the exercises in which we engage very often is saying what we know, and in so doing, reminding ourselves, reinforcing what we already know, clarifying what we already know, or what we take for granted but don't think too much about, right? So is everything that we're talking about so far just sort of standard for you? You say, yeah, I get it. That makes sense. What do you think? Carolyn? Good. Jasmine? Excellent. Any questions so far about what is going on with the conditional claim? Don't be shy. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and look at some examples and put our interpretation of hypothetical or conditional claims into practice. And what I mean by that interpretation is this: we have the arrow that is the symbol for the if-then relationship, where whatever comes after if goes on the left side of arrow, whatever comes after then goes on the right side of arrow. If we have other language, like the language of sufficiency, really, Mia? Sufficiency, necessity, right? We do the same thing. Okay, so let's look at some examples. Oops. And one more. Oops, is. Okay. So let's look at each one of these in turn. As with our ordinary English sentences involving negation, conjunction, disjunction, we want to sort of disentangle the connective from the simple sentence or atomic sentence, right? So, you're going to want to look at what you're given and, mark up your text, right? So, it could be something like this. I'm going to circle, my connectives. I'm going to do that first, right? And I take, if I don't see, so when I see the word if, I circle that. If I don't see the then, I just go ahead and circle the comma. And then I know that that's where I put my arrow, right? So that's one approach. Another approach is to underline your atomic sentences, right? So how about, let's take the second example. If I don't have time to read, I don't read mysteries, right? So we've got rephrase. I have time to read, right, is a simple sentence. I read mysteries is a simple sentence, right? So then you can, combine the two strategies, right? So if, and then the comma, it's not the case, right? That's asserted by the word don't, right? What do we think? Does this sound familiar in terms of previous approaches to translating? What do we think? Pretty good. Okay. And again, yell out or type out if you have a question, okay, or if you have a confusion or a comment, right? I rely on all of you, but Victoria has been steadfast in alerting me when I've written something or incorrectly. So I'll just put all the pressure on you, Victoria, to correct me if I write something that's erroneous. No pressure. Okay, so now let's work the last three together. And I know I'm giving you a tricky one on number 3, but pick a strategy. In other words, identify the atomic sentences, the simple sentences, or identify the connective. So pick one and tell me which one you're picking. I want to know. What strategy will you use? I got the chat window open. Somebody give me a strategy, or speak up and give me a strategy, whatever works for you. Dominic says main connective. All right, let's do it. Okay, so which word do we see? I said main connective. I didn't mean that. I meant, or no, did you say main connective? Sorry. Oh, you said main. Yeah. So Dominic, yeah. Notice in example 3, I go to campus only if I am vaccinated. We've only got one connective, but you're still right to say, hey, this is the or it's still perfectly legitimate, I should say, for you to say I'm going to pick that over looking at the simple sentence. So what is the connective that we see? Yeah, only if. And notice what Dominic did, everybody. Dominic grabbed only if, not just if. Okay, so here's something for you to think about when we're going to make a list of shorthand ordering of the left and the right side of arrow. Included in that is going to be the phrase only if. So can you tell me what you think only if expresses, right? So let's reformulate this sentence. I go to campus only if I am vaccinated. Will I go to campus without being vaccinated? Yes or no? Will I go to campus without being vaccinated? Yes or no? Everybody says no. You're exactly right. So let's write this out. Since I won't go to campus without being vaccinated, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later when we get into our intro and elim rules for the conditional claim, right? But I'll call back to this and it'll make even more sense, I hope, right? Since I won't go to campus without being vaccinated, only if expresses a necessary condition. So that then tells us the following. Let's make I go to campus, let's symbolize that with capital C, right? So I go to campus only if I am vaccinated. So if I go to campus, then I must be vaccinated. Okay. Let's go to the next one. If I go to campus, I must be vaccinated. Isn't that just what I said a moment ago when I reread the translated sentence? What do we think? So, if I go to campus, I must be vaccinated. I go to campus, I must be vaccinated. And then lastly, being vaccinated is a necessary condition for going to campus. Remember the previous whiteboard? Where does the necessary condition go? Before or after the arrow? Yep, after Carolyn, exactly. So, again, we have I go to campus, arrow, going to campus, being vaccinated. Okay. Excellent work. Now let's go back up to the previous examples. I guess I should have numbered these, huh? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 1, if I have time, I read mysteries. So we've got our arrow. How about T for I have time and M for I read mysteries? You do number 2. What's the translation? Say it or type it. If I don't have time, I don't read mysteries. Beautiful. I see. So Jasmine says negation T, arrow, negation M. From the standpoint of truth functionality, by the way, we will see that negation T, arrow, negation M can be converted. The equivalence is called contraposition. And we end up with M, arrow, T. So just file that one away. We're going to talk about that. Okay. And we'll prove it too. It's going to be so awesome. Okay. So we've got negation T, arrow, negation M. So if I don't have time, I don't read mysteries. and then we'll see that is, eventually we'll see that that is truth functionally equivalent to the sentence M arrow T, namely, if I read mysteries, then I have time to read. Okay? Good, good, good. Let me ask you a question. What's your comfort level with the reading so far in chapters? We're 15, 16, I think. Well, 15, I think, is practice, some additional practice with the Boolean operators, specifically the rules for the Boolean operators. And we will do some more practice today, but how is the reading going with chapter 16? So far, so good, I hope. Okay, so questions about any of these translations? Okay, so before we move on, I don't know if this will be helpful. I'll throw this out there and you can decide. But when, especially in, I think, law and the sciences, but, we also use conditional claims a lot in our daily lives, right? We can easily get confused by the relationship that the person asserting the conditional claim wants to establish, right? So if we have a method for interpreting the conditional, right, where we say, okay, antecedent in front of the arrow reflects the if-then order, antecedent arrow consequent, or sufficient arrow necessary. Well, if we have this method of interpreting a conditional claim, then even if we have to go back and kind of fix up our interpretation because maybe we didn't quite get things right, we at least have a start on making sense of what can be fairly confusing assertions. So I hope we'll see some examples to make good on that proposal. All right, so let's get our orders here, right? So translation, shorthand. Right, so we talked about if on the left side of arrow, then on the right. And that means that it doesn't matter where the if appears in the ordinary English sentence. So, think about it this way. I read mysteries if I have time, right? If I have time, then I read mysteries, right? The order remains the same. The only time the order is not the same as, or rephrase, the order of the elements is the same, right? So we've got if, and in both cases, right, we've got I read mysteries, or sorry, I just translated it wrong. If I have time, then I read mysteries, right? The exception to the if-then order, as we just saw a little bit ago, is with only if, right? So we've got, whatever the sentence is in the X placeholder, and then we have the phrase only if, right? We have antecedent, that's what we call it. Consequent, that's what we call it. We'll use that language a lot. We have sufficient condition, necessary condition. By the way, what we're calling the sufficient condition may not in fact be a sufficient condition, right? So, think about it this way. If there is oxygen in the room, then someone must be breathing in the room. Well, no, you could have an empty room. There's oxygen in the room, but nobody breathing, right? And this is why it's important for us to get the order. Just because we claim a sufficient condition or just because we claim a necessary condition doesn't mean that we've got it right. But we at least want to have the order of what the conditional claim is. Okay. All right. So those are some translation shorthands. We already know about the use of parentheses, right? So let's go back. That reminds me. So remember here, if I have a question, I type a message in the chat window or I speak up. So here, Ella, quiet. So here we would do the following. Since we know that this comma tells us that we have ended the if clause, right? All the rest of it goes in a parenthetical. So we end up with the following. If I have a question, then, sorry, let me make this prettier. Then I type a message or I speak up, right? So, we continue to use the translation techniques and symbols that we already know. Okay, what are our thoughts on this so far? What do we think? Pretty good, I hope. Fairly straightforward. If we get the basics, the nuts and bolts down, then when we get into, trickier stuff, we can kind of fall back on those nuts and bolts and use those as guides for making progress toward a better understanding of the trickier stuff. All right, so now let's talk about the truth table. Okay, so, let's do this. So I mentioned to you that the conditional is so not everyone will agree that the conditional claim is by its nature truth functional, right? So remember, we talked about the truth definitions of negation, conjunction, disjunction in terms of a sentence's truth or falsity being a function of the constituent elements in the sentence and the meaning of the operation of the connective, right? So a negation operates on a sentence. A conjunction operates on two sentences. A disjunction operates on two sentences. And those sentences can be simple. Those sentences can be compound themselves, right? But the arrow, the conditional, isn't, it's not the case that we say every single conditional claim plays out in the truth table the way that we're going to say that it does. So one way to think about the truth table is that it reflects the conventional interpretation of what is called the material conditional. So I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment, but for right now, I'm going to try to prey upon your content knowledge, your instincts about conditional claims, so that the truth definitions for the conditional make sense to you, so that you initially at least say, okay, the arrow is, or the truth definitions for the arrow really are functions of the elements and the way the operator works on them. Okay, so let me start with the example. If Pierce College is in Woodland Hills, California, then Pierce College is in the United States. Do you say this sentence is true or false? Yeah, good. True. Okay. Next sentence. If Pierce College is in Woodland Hills, California, then Pierce College is in France. Do you say true or false? Good. All right, next one. If Pierce College is in Santa Monica, California, then Pierce College is in the United States. True or false? Yep. Thank you, Arshak. Thank you, Ziba. Good, good, good. And then lastly, if Pierce College is in Paris, France, then Pierce College is in Europe. True or false? Yep. Okay. So let's think about what we've just done. We've taken sentences, back out of that. We've taken simple sentences that we know to be either true or false. We believe to be either true or false, right? And we've plugged them into our ordinary ways of thinking about the conditional claim, and right? And so I did that to kind of pump our, not pump so much as to leverage, I guess that's pump, let me back out of that sentence altogether. I leveraged our beliefs, our knowledge of, beliefs about knowledge of the facts of our lives, right? to try to make sense of each of the 4 rows of the truth table. Okay? So, but what you're going to probably say in objection is, well, wait a minute, Mia, I can come up with, the same permutations of possible truth values in other examples, and we don't get the same rows, right? So hold on to that. So here's how the truth definitions for the material conditional layout, right? So remember, we have any old sentence in the universe P, any old sentence in the universe Q. P is true, true, false, false. Q is true, false, true, false. And remember what we just did, right? We said if Pierce College is in Woodland Hills, California, then it's in the United States, right? If Pierce College is in Woodland Hills, then it's in Paris, France. If Pierce College is in Santa Monica, then it's in the United States. And finally, if Pierce College is in Paris, France, then it is in Europe, right? So that's how we can, begin to make sense of, particularly, I think anyway, row 4, right? How is it that a false antecedent and a false consequent yield a true arrow, right? All right, so what do we think about this so far? Or is your thinking, well, you're telling me this is the case. We just looked at an example, a set of examples. Okay, I believe you. Or does anybody have any objections? Like, no, Mia, this isn't how it works. What do you think? So far, so good? I have a question for you. Thank you, Victoria, do the rows of the truth table for the arrow remind you of anything? Look at row 2. What do you think about this? Right? So the only row 2, on which the arrow is false is the row on which the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. Yeah? This definition maps onto the definition, the definition of a valid argument. Sorry, I meant to say, I was getting ahead of myself. An invalid argument. Which is to say, the premise or premises are true and the conclusion is false. Right? That's the one permutation of values you cannot have and still say you have a valid argument, right? So the arrow maps onto our conception of validity or vice versa, right? So, so one way that we can justify, if you will, the truth definitions for arrow is to say this is how we're interpreting the arrow, right? So this interpretation of the arrow means that the truth definitions do not reflect the dependent relationship we typically attribute to conditional claims. Right? So, that said, it's not like we can't be very careful with how we produce conditional claims so that we're the claim itself, matches the truth functional definitions, right? So there's a sense in which we can be really careful. Alternatively, if we run up against a sentence that resists the truth functional interpretation, we say, okay, well, we need to rework that sentence so that we can, let's say, use it in an argument, right? So, so let me give you an example of what I mean by a sentence that resists the truth functional interpretation. So how about this? If Woodland Hills, California, is in New England, then Woodland Hills, California, is in South America. Right? What are you going to say to this sentence? True or false? Yeah, it's false. Right? So false antecedent, false consequent, we say the sentence is false. Well, that violates the definition that we have at row 4, right? So, what we need to think about then is, okay, on the one hand, when I think in the terms that we were talking about earlier, sufficiency, necessity, and right, and so forth, we get some really great clarity on what it is that people are saying or what we're saying when we're thinking in causal terms, right? Because it can be really confusing. It can make you feel like you're playing mental twisters. So it can provide us with great clarity, right? At the same time, we recognize that, there are sentences that do not reflect any kind of causal relationship, right? They're put in an if-then form, but there's no causal relationship expressed, right? So, what we then say is, okay, so we interpret the arrow truth functionally, right, in the ways that we have articulated. Right? The only time the arrow is false is when the antecedent's true and the consequent is false, right? And so when we do that, we sort of free ourselves up from thinking exclusively in terms of a causal or dependent relationship. At the same time, though, when we're dealing with properly rephrase, when we're dealing with proper sufficient conditions, necessary conditions, this set of truth definitions is very helpful to us. And thinking in terms of ordering our elements, sufficient condition on the left side of the arrow, necessary condition on the right, is very, very helpful to us. Okay. All right. So before we move on to the biconditional, let me throw a couple further ideas out for us to think about. So, strictly speaking, so let me actually write that. Strictly speaking, we do not require the conditional, and here's the two-way arrow, the biconditional, for a deductive system to be complete. Everything we assert with the conditional and the biconditional, we can assert with the Boolean connectives. That said, we use the conditional and the biconditional because they serve as nice shorthands, and also because just in our ordinary English, we use the if-then language all the time, very often. So it is helpful to us to have a shorthand. But let me give you an example of what I mean. So, for example, instead of P arrow Q, we can write not P or Q. These are truth functionally equivalent sentences. These are tautological equivalences. Let's go ahead and throw them into a truth table so that you can see that. And then we'll move on to the biconditional. And by the way, we're going to prove these equivalences. It's going to be so much fun. So in some versions of the system that we're learning, we use equivalences as rules in derivations, right? But in our version of the system, we're actually proving what is often used as rules in derivations. So in our view, in our department, we get a bit more robust set of skills. Okay, so P, Q, here is P arrow Q, and not P or Q. All right. Tell me the values for arrow. Tell me the values for the disjunction. So tell me what to write on row number 1 for P arrow Q. Thank you, Jasmine. Row number 2 for P arrow Q. Thank you, Jasmine. Row number 3 for P arrow Q. Thank you also, Zeba. T, and row 4. Beautiful. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Now, what are we going to write for negation P? Negation P is good, false. Negation P is false. Negation P is True. Thank you, Victoria. And negation P is true. Excellent. And then lastly, disjunction. False disjunction true is. Thank you, Victoria. False disjunction true, or sorry. False disjunction false is. Beautiful. Thank you, Jasmine. True. We don't even need to know what Q is in the last two, do we? Right? Scribble these out. And hello. Truth functional equivalence. Right? Now let me give you an equivalence for the biconditional in terms of the Boolean operators, and then let's chat about the biconditional. So here's a biconditional. So example, instead of P biconditional Q, we can write both P and Q or neither P nor Q. And you can see in that, in the Boolean notation, the sentence is longer, right? So the biconditional serves us as a kind of a nice shorthand, if you will. All right, so let's talk a bit about the biconditional. In our ordinary language, we use the biconditional, I think. I mean, I don't know what the statistics are, if anybody has statistics on it, but my suspicion is we use the biconditional far less frequently in our ordinary lives than we do in, let's say, math or in the sciences, right? So the biconditional, as you probably can imagine, not only from what I wrote, but also just from the word itself, is a two-way conditional. One way to think about it is in terms of a joint, necessary, and sufficient condition. Right? So example, I go to campus if and only if I am vaccinated. Or we'd say, my being vaccinated is a necessary and sufficient condition of my going to campus. Or you could say for my going to campus, or for me to go to campus. That might sound better. For me to go to campus. And another way to say that then is to say, well, if I go to campus, then I must be vaccinated. And if, sorry, didn't mean to put a capital I there. And if I am vaccinated, then I must go to campus. Right? So let's look at the single conditional claim, see if we can make some more sense of this two-way conditional claim, right? So remember we had said earlier, I go to campus only if I am vaccinated, which is to say, I don't go to campus without being vaccinated, which is to say that being vaccinated is a requirement for me to go to campus. So here's a question for you. Suppose I am vaccinated. Does that mean that, in fact, I go to campus? And I'm asking because, again, when we push into what should be, I think, chapter 17, we want to be comfortable with what it means for an argument to affirm the antecedent versus affirm the consequent, versus affirming the consequent, right? So let me ask you this question. So question. Does being vaccinated guarantee I go to campus? What do you guys think? So take whichever sentence is the most intellectually comfortable. I'm hopeful that one of the three is, I go to campus only if I'm vaccinated. I don't go to campus without being vaccinated. Being vaccinated is a requirement for me to go to campus. I can put the original one up there too. If I go to campus, then I am vaccinated. Right? So question, what do you think? Let's say, so we got the first sentence. If I go to campus, I am vaccinated. And suppose I walk up and say, I'm vaccinated. Does that being vaccinated guarantee that I will go to that I go to campus? What do you think? What does your intellectual gut say? Right, Arshak, it does not. Does anybody disagree? And this is one of the reasons why we want to get clarification, is it's really easy to get turned around with this stuff. Arshak, can you, so your intellectual gut says, no, it doesn't guarantee that I go to campus. Can you try to articulate why that's the case? What it is about, so here's the language we're going to use. Affirming the consequent does not entail the antecedent. Does not entail the antecedent. No. Affirming the consequent. Oh boy, I can spell. Affirming the consequent does not entail the antecedent. Okay, so Arshak, I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot. Hold on a second. Okay, can you say something about why your intellectual gut says no? Affirming the consequent does not tell me anything about the antecedent.
It's because to go onto the campus, it's a requirement to be vaccinated. But let's say you're not a student at Pierce and you get vaccinated. It's not like you have to go to Pierce if you're vaccinated.
Beautiful. Good for you. That was a lovely counterexample. Well done. Excellent. Right. Now let's ask a different question, but within the same scope. If I go to campus, does that guarantee that I'm vaccinated? What do you guys think?
Yes.
It does. Yes, Zeba. Yep. Great. So here's another question. Does going to campus guarantee I am vaccinated? And the answer is yes. Affirming. Sorry. Affirming the antecedent. Remember, we talked about the sufficient condition, right? Affirming the antecedent guarantees, entails the consequent. So, by the way, you're now with this brief discussion about the answer to the question of guaranteeing being vaccinated, you're into what's known as conditional elim from chapter 17. Okay, so now let's go back to because we need I hope we've started the process of distinguishing the conditional from the biconditional. So, the biconditional, let's say in terms of scientific claims, right, is probably not asserted as much as the conditional. That's probably because in the natural sciences, there are, fewer joint necessary and sufficient conditions, right? So, for example, just because there's oxygen doesn't mean that you are going to have fire, right? So, oxygen is necessary for fire, right? But oxygen isn't sufficient for fire, right? So, we want to, as if we're, scientists or legal scholars or just, in our daily lives, we want to be careful about what we're asserting to be, joint necessary and sufficient conditions. That's a pretty robust claim. Okay, so the standard translation. Let's see, where was I before? View all whiteboards. All right, Sue. Okay. All right, so back to the biconditional. Right, so the standard translation for the two-way arrow is this, right? Some sentence on the left side of the biconditional, some sentence on the right side of the biconditional, right? So we would say, if we say something like X is necessary and sufficient for Y, or we say X if and only if y, then we have our biconditional. And notice that in our ordinary English, the biconditional, or sorry, notice in ordinary English we have the language of the conditional, we have the language of the conjunction, right? So and or we could say something like this: either I have both X and Y, or I have neither. Right here again, we've got the language of the Boolean connectives, right? So what you'd want to do is notice that it's not that you've got just a necessary condition asserted or just a sufficient condition asserted, right? It's that you've got them both. You've got the joint, right? If and only if, right? Both or neither, right? So here again, X if and only if Y. Now, question for you. Given the talk about the biconditional, what do you think the truth table is going to look like? The truth definitions, how we define the biconditional. What do you think that's going to look like? Oops. Nice, Jasmine. Really good. Did everybody see that? Oops. Maybe not. I distracted you with my terrible writing. So Jasmine says, since we're saying that we have both or we have neither, sorry again. Since we're saying we have both or we have neither, the values for P and Q have to be the same. If the values are not the same, I guess I should make the reference column bigger. If the values are not the same, then the biconditional is false. Thoughts? Love it, love it, love it. I hope. Okay. Questions, problems, confusions, comments. We definitely want to keep practicing with the Boolean stuff, but how are we doing so far today? Seems like from what you've written in the chat that you've got a pretty good handle on things, but what do you think? Is there anything that you're dying to talk about? Okay, well, if something comes up, you know I'm here. Let me know if you want to chat. Obviously, office hours, you should expect to find me waiting to help. But if you can't make office hours, or it just doesn't isn't easy for you or convenient, let me know and we'll find another time to meet. Okay. In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you on Thursday. Have a good one, everybody.